Well, that's funny because, first of all, it started out as the first novel that I wrote that had gone nowhere, had a really interesting, minor but impactful character in it. And everyone loved her, including me. And so I started thinking, what would her backstory be? And ultimately, it led me back to a thing I've always been fascinated by, which is the Dust Bowl era. And I decided at that point I needed to set my story there and from the perspective of a family that was enduring it. But then it wasn't really until one day I was talking to my husband's mother, and she's a native Texan. And I had done a little family research for her because that was another one of my down the rabbit hole passions. And so I had come up with some of the names of all of her. I mean, she knew this. She just never told me some of the names of all of her, relatives, her aunts and mother and all kinds of that. And the names were really fun, like Aunt Ruby or Pearl or Willie Mae and the last names and everything. And when she told me that, I started thinking about it. I said, those are my characters. Not their lives, but their names. I can kind of picture now who these people are. So the funny thing about that was one day I told her, I'm writing a book and all the characters are named Willie Mae and Ruby Lee and, Pearl and Ida and I just reeled off all the names. And she said, well, what happens? And I told her a little bit about the story. And she said, well, that's not what happened to my family. So I quickly realized she thought I was literally writing the story of her family. So that was the last time I told her much about that. I just figured she'd read it one day.
Welcome back to Living the Next Chapter, the author podcast. We get to meet amazing people from around the world. And I'm really excited to have this guest on the show. Not only is she coming on as a guest, she actually listens to some of the episodes, which makes my heart so happy. Jann is here to talk about her journey as an author. You're going to learn so much. You're going to fall in love with an author that's going to fill up your bookshelf with many, many more books now and to come. I'm excited to have Jann on the podcast. Welcome, Jann, to the show.
Thanks. I'm actually all that excited to be here, too. And I love listening to podcasts, and yours included. So thanks.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Let's start off here, Jann. Where are you in this great, big, beautiful world of ours?
I am actually in Central Texas in the United States. And that's actually kind of pivotal to why I'm writing, because when I came here about 20 years ago, it was such a foreign world to me, even though it is America. It was just a different world, and I had to explore it and learn it and understand it. And it had a lot of vibrant writing material. Yeah.
So where did you move from to go to Texas?
I lived on the East Coast in the D.C. area most of my life, where I had a career, raised a child. I did art direction for ad agencies initially, and then moved on to magazine design. And my first job was at the Washington Post Sunday magazine. And so I found that I thrilled to the necessity of meeting a deadline once a week, because every issue had to get put out for every Sunday. So
right.
That was very, I kind of look back on that and think of that as an experience that really taught me about researching and learning and how to write, even though I was the art director, not the writer, but I was exposed to a lot, and I had a lot of ability to research and, just kind of be an explorer at that point.
How does a deadline help you as a writer to meet a demand and produce? Like, is that kind of something that helps you as a writer?
I do. That's great. I think it's like it gives you this ethic that you have to get something done. I mean, especially when you're a writer, you're self-employed. You can kind of do whatever you want all day long, right? Or you can sit your little butt down in the chair and get to work and meet your deadline. And so I guess creative people are often accused of missing deadlines or waiting until the end, and then that deadline gives them the adrenaline to go forward. And I don't really have that too much. I'm just always happy to be creating, so I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so we have lots of authors listening to the show, and they come here to be inspired by great authors like yourself. They dream of having a published book. They dream of being on a podcast to talk about their journey. Here you are. You've done it. You know things that could really help somebody listening. If we were to rewind a little bit back to your beginning of writing in this form, what would have been helpful to hear on a podcast to you as a new author back when you first started? What would have been helpful to hear from another author?
Really good question. So I'm telling my younger self that since I always loved writing since I was a child, to keep practicing it, whether my career path took me in other directions, there's never a reason you can't write and keep your skills up. And that the path to becoming a published author can be long and meandering, and you can have a good time doing a lot of things along the way. And it all goes in there. It all adds up to your life experience and what you're able to put out as an author. So I think it's really helpful if you think you're at all interested in writing to look at all the options for workshops you can take and be a little bit critical of them. There's lots of choices and lots of ways to separate writers from their money. And it's kind of its own little business right now to have a workshop, learn this, learn that. But it's important to learn, and there are books on the craft of writing, and of course, just reading all the time, the kind of work that you think you'd like to write, well, then you need to read it so you understand how it's all put together. But at the end of the day, nothing really takes the place of just sitting down and writing and writing and writing and practicing it. And maybe starting with short stories, or I started with a blog, actually, because I got interested in, I had a different career path going on. I was in being a painter and a photographer and had an art gallery. And so I was kind of like, I wanted to flex my writing muscles. And blogging was a big thing when it first was starting out, and a great way to promote yourself. And for me, it ended up being practice for writing, like getting to the point. You had to figure it out in a short little bit of text and also you had to attract the reader right away, or they're going to move on to the next blog. So I think, something like that, to that effect, there's lots of opportunities to try things like that and eventually get better and better at it. But my real advice is don't shy away from it. Don't think it's not possible. There are many, many ways to get to published, and, you may have to try, and as long as you persevere, you can do it.
How long did it take you to move from blogs to a published author? What's the time span, roughly?
Well, because I was doing other things along the way, I was not a full-time trying to be published author. I was also having an art gallery and having a photography painting business, but the writing was always there. So I would say that path took about 18 years.
Wow.
But what I had done was write, I wrote one novel, which took a good off and on again, life intervened, and it took a good maybe 8 years to finish it. And then once I finished it, I began to shop it around to literary agents, and that was a frustrating endeavor for a first-time author. Like many authors realize later that their first novel is not going to get picked up. They have to keep writing and write a second novel. But in any event, that's what I started doing to sort of distract myself from the fact that nobody was answering my queries. I started writing the second novel, and that was ultimately the one that got published. And along the way, I let my fascination with historical research work its way in there, so that I mean, this is all over a 20-year span, but I had about 10 years of historical research that I worked on in there too, and tried to decide how I could work it into a novel or two or three. Actually, the way I look at it now is I have novels until the day I die from all the research done and ideas for them. So I paid it forward.
Wow.
I already paid it forward. I don't really have to research it anymore, but I love researching. It never ends. So I just always do it.
A good example of digging the well before you're thirsty. That's kind of what you've done. You got all the content, right?
Well, I did feel that way, that I had to gather everything I possibly could. I mean, we all know that's not true, but that's kind of, that's what inspired me, truthfully, is if I read accounts of things that I didn't know much about. And then I read accounts of things that were like really literal first person accounts from just ordinary people. I began to
Yeah.
get inspired by those and think about, well, what would it be like to do that, as a fictional character? So,
Who inspires you as authors? Like, is there a type of author that you feel gravitating to as a reader?
I really do gravitate towards historical fiction authors, but
Okay.
I love to read literary and contemporary authors too. Anybody who has what I call a voice, which is the thing that authors talk about a lot. If you, as a writer, don't have a voice that comes across on the page, then I'm not going to read it. I'm just not going to be captivated by it. So,
Yeah.
and that's a very personal thing also. Who is attracted to what voice is also very
Yeah.
personal. But we have a Texas author who just died recently, and she was fabulous, named Paulette Giles. And I tried to read everything I could get my hands on of hers because she wrote historical. She didn't always write about Texas, but she really found her way to speak the vernacular and the feelings and the people of the times that she was writing about. Plus, she
Okay.
was skilled at writing.
Yeah.
You get more and more skilled at writing the longer you practice at it.
When did you realize you found your voice as an author?
With this second novel called Unspoken that just was published in July, I felt like that because I wrote it in first person. So I really was there in every experience that I did. And I really took the time to just, every time I was going to sit down to write, I'd review some of the research, whatever it was, and get myself into the headspace and the role and the mindset of all these people. And then it seemed like the words just came out in their voices and the way they would tell it.
So what was the seed for you to write Unspoken? What was the moment you're like, oh, I know what I'm doing next?
Well, that's funny because, first of all, it started out as the first novel that I wrote that had gone nowhere, had a really interesting, minor but impactful character in it. And everyone loved her, including me. And so I started thinking, what would her backstory be? And ultimately, it led me back to a thing I've always been fascinated by, which is the Dust Bowl era. And I decided at that point I needed to set my story there and from the perspective of a family that was enduring it. But then it wasn't really until one day I was talking to my husband's mother, and she's a native Texan. And I had done a little family research for her because that was another one of my down the rabbit hole passions. And so I had come up with some of the names of all of her. I mean, she knew this. She just never told me some of the names of all of her, relatives, her aunts and mother and all kinds of that. And the names were really fun, like Aunt Ruby or Pearl or Willie Mae and the last names and everything. And when she told me that, I started thinking about it. I said, those are my characters. Not their lives, but their names.
Yeah.
I can kind of picture now who these people are. So the funny thing about that was one day I told her, I'm writing a book and all the characters are named Willie Mae and Ruby Lee and, Pearl and Ida. And I just reeled off all the names. And she said, well, what happens? And I told her a little bit about the story. And she said, well, that's not what happened to my family. So I quickly realized she thought I was literally writing the story of her family. So that was the last time I told her much about that. I just figured she'd read it one day.
For those people who don't know the history of Texas and the Dust Bowl era, can you kind of give us kind of an overview, like what was going on? What's the history there? Why the significance of that? Because I think would be really helpful as well.
Sure. In the U.S., I think all students are taught about the Dust Bowl pretty briefly. And also another thing in the U.S. is a lot of students are required to read John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. And I think that's the sum total of their knowledge about the Dust Bowl. but there's really so much more to it than that. And it's really a phenomenon. It was the biggest ecological disaster that the country has ever had, and it was a phenomenon that was about 40 years in the making. It didn't just. I think a lot of people are taught it came up because there was a big drought, and it's true there was a massive drought for about 5 years in a windy part of the country where the wind just got worse, and the topsoil started to fly, and that was what caused the dust storms. But the reality was, the path for that was laid much earlier, in an odd circumstance of situations where the new state of Texas needed a state capitol building, and they had public lands in the west of Texas that they sold off in order to finance the building of the Capitol building. And then those lands were acquired by speculators who just wanted to use them for ranch land, and then ultimately unload them to pay off their debt. But what happened was, this was land that had only ever been grazed by bison. And so, men had killed off the bison. The next thing, we got cattle grazing in there, and all the native grasses that had grown up over centuries and had been kept there and kept the land intact there were not growing back because the cattle were a different breed of grazing animal. And so once all the nutrients were depleted from all that soil, and it was no good as ranch land, they had the brilliant idea to sell it off as farmland. And that coincided with World War I, when the United States was trying to supply wheat to the world, especially to Europe that was no longer able to produce it for itself. And it just happened to also coincide with a really radical time in the history of the arid country, which is what that was, where there was actually rain. And so there was an unusual decade that had more abundant rain than normal. And so all that conspired together to make farmers go for the biggest land rush ever and think that they could grow wheat and make a killing. And it called in speculators were attracted to it also. And then the problem became, once the drought rolled in and there was no abundant rain, the first people to abandon the land were the speculators, who'd already made their killing anyway. And bingo, 1929, the stock market crashed. And so suddenly all these people are probably penniless or near penniless. And so they just, leave the abandoned land to the bank. Meanwhile, the farmers that are still there are now poor and impoverished from the Great Depression onset, as well as they're just having constant drought and high winds. And so there were just years where the wind was so relentless and the topsoil was flying in every direction. It wasn't just Texas. It happened in parts of New Mexico and Colorado, but also Oklahoma, Kansas, even up north into the Dakotas. And so it was a very devastating time. All told, it was about 10 years of, drought, depression, and high winds and dust storms. And it was a huge mass migration. 2.5 million people left that part of the country to go elsewhere during that time. So to me, that's a pretty fertile setting for a book, especially in times like these, like just today. I don't know if you noticed on the news, but in Phoenix, Arizona, yes. Yeah, and that's just a one-time thing that happened today, and it probably won't happen relentlessly, but that's what happened relentlessly during the Dust Bowl era of roughly 1930 to 1940 until it finally came to an end.
Yeah, I've been to Phoenix several times and talked to people there, and they talk about when those dust storms go through, it fills up your pool, it chokes out all the air conditioning, it is just a pain. It's just a mess.
It's awful. Right? I read a couple of accounts today in a news article where the people that were in it they were actually quoting lines from my book, which was funny to me. Obviously, they haven't read my book. They were just
Yeah.
saying the same things that people in the
Well,
1930s said about it, how it crept in, through any tiny crack. They couldn't keep it out of their
yeah.
houses. They couldn't see their hands in front of their face. They had to pull over. They couldn't drive,
Yeah.
and that just those are the probably those people who were interviewed in those stories. I kept thinking, well, those are the people that were well off enough to be, survive it and be okay. But what about the poor people or the homeless people there? What happened
Right.
when
Where do they go?
yeah, exactly.
Right.
And that's the same thing that happened in the Dust Bowl era, is that the people who were more impoverished couldn't really withstand the effects of it. And it's like you say, it started to clog up their lungs. And so, especially if they
Yeah.
were elderly or very young, they would either have, lung illnesses for the rest of their lives or die. A lot of them died because they just couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
So now I've laid a very pretty picture of a.
It's very timely with what's happening in Phoenix
That's
today as we're
true.
talking, right? Yeah.
But
Wow.
see, I like writing books where the themes are the universal themes, and so
Yeah.
I feel like in Unspoken, there's family estrangement, and there's lost and found families, and it's all caused by environmental harms and poverty, and it's the typical things that we have to this day. It doesn't seem to ever change, and I was I was really invested in writing characters who didn't, like in John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, they didn't abandon the area and go to California for the glory land, which actually wasn't glory land for them at all because they had no work there. But I became very invested in writing about people that stayed and stuck it out, and what would it be like, and why would they do that, and what kind of characters would they have.
Talk a little bit about some of the main characters we're going to come across in Unspoken. What do we need to know about these people in advance? Can you kind of introduce us to some of the people we're
Okay,
going to meet?
sure. The main character, who is the first person voice, is Ruby Lee Becker, and as the novel starts, she's 10 years old. And in the Black Sunday dust storm, which is the most famous one of all that occurred in 1935 in April, and it's kind of the one that awakened the country to the fact that we had to do something other than just, ignore it. And she ages as the book goes along and becomes incredibly determined to keep her family, who has scattered across Texas as a result of all this, to try to keep a sense of family, keep a sense of home, and put it all back together again. But she herself is impacted by the brown plague, as they called it, dust pneumonia, so she can't even stay there. She has to go elsewhere, and she's sent to central Texas, to Waco, where she will become maybe the most tenacious child you can ever imagine, wily and determined. She's going to put her family back together again, and she's also a dreamer because she dreams of an idyllic existence that she never even had, but that's her dream. And then her mother is another major character who was impacted by the dust storms in a different way, and ends up separated from Ruby. Her mother's name Willa May, and her own experiences are recounted in journals and portraits and drawings that she does to try to keep her memories alive, because she ends up being institutionalized and misjudged as just another person driven mad by dust, and is desperate to get her family back, in particular her young daughter back. So as Ruby Lee ages, and she's about almost 25 by the time the novel concludes, she's really had to face up to a lot of fears and things that were not spoken of. And we all have these unspoken things. Families keep secrets, and I find it fascinating that the family secrets can cause so much harm over time and misunderstanding.
Yeah.
And so,
Right.
But I tried to write Ruby as a rambunctious, very resourceful kid who was never going to back down and never give up and never quit, and more tenacious than fire ants, which is a thing Texas people have. They are tenacious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
If you ever step into a fire ant hill with your flip flops on, you'll regret that.
You'll know it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, and Willa May is, I think, a really sympathetic character because she ended up struggling against what she dreamed of and accepting her husband's dream instead, and had to accept her husband's dream. It was the times they lived in. So she was frustrated in that way. But and then there are a lot of little peripheral characters that are entertaining and fun. And there are some major true historical figures who Ruby meets and Willa May meets along the way who inspire them and mentor them. And I don't want to give them away because I think it's part of the fun of reading the book.
Nice.
But they are really well-known characters that were icons of their era, and you would know their names too.
Yeah.
And I took great pleasure in putting them in the book in the actual locations that they really were, and then I contrived the fictional characters' encounters around that. So
it's kind of like a movie when they're filming like a movie in the 1950s, and they get a bunch of 1950s automobiles and they put them on the street, and you're like, oh, I feel like even though it's the same street that we see today, just changing the decor and having the cars and people dressing a certain way brings you to that moment, even though it's 2025. I like how you ground your story with real people and real places to bring a fictional story and some reality to it as well.
Yeah, I think that's important because there's a culture to every time. So if you were writing a story about today, you'd have today's culture. But I thought it was fascinating to write about the cultural icons of that time. And also, I agree with you about films that have all the right cars and all the right period things. I just besotted with those because when I write, I try to picture the whole setting in the scene, and that way, if I'm going to bring in a little detail as a descriptor, then it's there. It's in my head what it needs to be.
Yeah, because life at that time was way more difficult, and people didn't live as long.
Right.
There wasn't the kind of health care back then to keep you from simple things that we would see today that are like a quick drive to the pharmacy, no problem. Back then, it was a totally different thing, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be in that mindset when you write and read this as well.
I mean, this took place about 90 years ago, and it's remarkable how much we have changed in 90 years. But, the people in the Dust Bowl, parts of the Dust Bowl, didn't really even have electrification, possibly. No. And they definitely didn't have telephones. You probably could make a phone call if you went into town. But they still relied on telegrams and mail and newspapers when they came out. There was nothing speedy about communication at all, which is kind of why it took so long for the Dust Bowl to be noted by the rest of the country. Yeah.
How would they know compared to now where you can see things live in the moment?
Right.
And you can experience it firsthand. Right. There would be weeks.
If it was weeks, later, even longer.
Or longer than that.
There was, I just recently read this, and I can't believe it took me this long to know this, but the famous photographer Dorothea Lange, who was, she took the one iconic photo everybody knows from the Dust Bowl of the migrant mother. But she had been assigned by one of the government programs that had been set up under President Roosevelt to try to give people work that paid. And so her job was part of a group of farms. They were actually called the Farm Security Administration photographers. And they were basically a publicity arm to go out around the country, photograph how farms were doing as President Roosevelt tried to enact reforms to help the poor and the farmers, et cetera. And so when she struck out for Texas to take pictures, she just happened to arrive, in 1934, 35, 36, when the dust storms were just awful and they had like subsumed people's homes, and left
Yeah.
massive drifts like you'd find in a desert. And so
Yeah.
she photographed that, and that was when the world first started to take notice because she sent these images back to Washington, D.C., where they began to get issued to the newspapers, and it was sort of like, wow, nobody had any idea. It was that's how isolated everything was back then. And
Well,
and certainly if you lived in that era and all you could do is try to survive, you weren't really worried about getting word out to the rest of the country. You were
yeah.
yeah, you were taking
Yeah.
care of your day-to-day survival. So I find it
Up here in
fascinating
Canada.
that
Yeah.
so many Americans went through this and came
Yeah.
away from it, I'm sure stronger, but also totally changed by it. Um,
Right.
and
Yeah. Up here in Canada, we have snow.
yes,
We don't have sand and dust for us up here. It's snow
yeah.
that shuts us down.
Do you have
Right.
do you have,
So we have
great
our,
blizzards that were made a giant impact at a certain
like
time?
Buffalo, New York, back years and years ago, snow taller than buildings, and you couldn't go anywhere.
Uh-huh.
Right. So it's kind of the opposite, freezing cold as
Right.
well. So
Right. You
right.
better have your heat in your house already and your food in your house
Yeah.
already. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Wonder when that was. That was during your lifetime?
That would have been back in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
So, right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, when I was little. But yeah. So, but yeah, it's amazing how natural effects and natural disasters have impacts on people
Uh-huh.
and change things,
Yeah.
change people's family stories, where they live,
Right.
history, everything. Right? It's
Everything.
all impacted. And it's completely out of your control
Right.
as well.
Exactly. The only thing that never seems to change is public policy to try to prevent these things or be prepared for them in the next go around. It's kind of
Right.
like it's nobody really wants to focus on the long term picture of when the next disaster comes. They just are all about the short term things.
Yeah. What is your love letter to the readers for Unspoken? What do you want them to walk away from reading the book? How do you know you reached your goal for the reader?
I like that idea of a love letter to the reader. I want them to really love my characters because they recognize that I've written characters that will face down their fears. They may regret it, they may not want to, they may drag their feet for the longest time. But to me, that's the ultimate sign of somebody who's brave, who will face up to their fears. And I also want them to come away with the sense that, yeah, it's fiction, but it is as close to true as fiction can get. And to understand and empathize with people in scenarios like that and maybe apply them to other scenarios. And I also kind of hope that readers are stimulated to understand people's psychological motives, the character's psychological motives, and to try to understand why they might have done a thing, and then thus they get a better maybe understanding of themselves or their own loved ones or friends if they can understand that. So it kind of goes back to empathy. And I definitely want people to feel moved by the experiences because
Yeah.
I felt moved by all of it. I thought it was pretty amazing, and I couldn't really imagine. I hoped I would have been as strong and resourceful, but who knows? Until you're tested, you never really know.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I like that. How did you endeavor to make your characters real for the reader? What did you do to give them that characteristic or something that stands out for the reader?
Yeah.
Because I can see this person walking up to me in real life. How did you do that?
I spent a lot of time just thinking on why would they act that way. In other words, trying to understand what their backstories were, and maybe what afflicted them, what weight they carried or burden they carried. And I also, because it's historical fiction, I could really immerse myself in the way people spoke at that time because of letters,
Right.
diaries, oral histories that were made. So it was possible to try to emulate the way they would talk. And then, of course, lots of amazing documentary photography and footage that showed me what people looked like back then. And so our Library of Congress has so much of that, and it's just a treasure chest of things you can go and find. And but there's other repositories for all this sort of thing too. So those by kind of being immersed really in the sights and the sounds, and trying to hear the voices, by reading the oral histories and the diaries, and then just trying to have an understanding of general psychology and
Yeah.
yeah.
Talk about the cover of the book. It's beautiful. Like, who helped you with this? Where did that come from?
Thank you for thinking that. Because I was an art director, I felt I knew what I wanted for my cover, but I work with
Yeah.
a publisher, and they have a very skilled design director who does the covers, but he was very amenable to working with me. So I created the rough of what I wanted, and I actually pieced together some copyright free photographs from the Times, and came up with some other elements that are in the book, and thought that, chose the typography I thought was typical of the times. And I actually had a really good time doing it because I don't art direct many projects anymore. But I once did book covers, and I once did design magazines and all. And so, but I wanted input because, I'm the sole person here judging the book and all that stuff. So I wanted to hear from the design director who does lots of covers for the publisher, but he was all for it. So that's how it came about.
I don't understand that saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Because I think your covers are amazing. I would go, this is my book, just by seeing the cover of your book. I am judging your book by your
cover. But a book cover, here's another one though for you. A book cover sells the book.
Yeah.
You aren't going to pick up a book about the Dust Bowl if it's just kind of a dull, boring thing that doesn't even show you the history of the era.
Right, yeah.
But I think that don't judge a book by its cover. Is a kind of, don't you think it's a silly reference to just the way a person looks? You shouldn't judge them.
True.
And it's true.
There you go.
It's really true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think your book cover is beautiful. I can tell that it has a little bit of Jann in there.
Oh, really? Thank you.
Just a hint of Jann, yeah. Is there anything on that cover specifically that we're going to uncover in the story that's kind of a little hidden, little nod for the readers?
There is a suitcase on the cover.
Okay, a suitcase.
The cardboard suitcase, which was a real thing back then. People who weren't real well off had cardboard suitcases. And in order to put it on the cover, I needed to know what it looked like. And I went looking online, for Etsy and eBay for vintage cardboard suitcases. And I found a good selection of them. Let me just say, they're out there. And so we used that. And the suitcase is a significant symbol that travels throughout the book as just sort of the symbol of Ruby's hurts and also the things she can't let go of. And then later, after the book was published, I thought, well, I'd like to have, when I do book talks and go to book clubs and stuff, I'd like to really have a suitcase like that. And so I went looking again on vintage stores and eBay and Etsy, and I found one pretty close to the cover, and I ordered it and had a very entertaining conversation with the shop owner. I said, this is on my book cover, and here's what it looks like on the book cover, and I'm going to use it, for that purpose. And so that was pretty fun.
So you got one. Wow.
I've got one, and it's filled with replicas of the things that Ruby had in her suitcase, her cardboard suitcase. So
talk about doing your homework. Yeah.
It would have been so much smarter if I'd sourced all this stuff first and then put it in the book, but I didn't think of that. So
no.
Playing
you just got to reverse the order.
I had to reverse it, but there's a little cloche hat that belonged to Ruby's mother, and a brush and comb set that belonged to her, and a few other little important items that appear in the book. So.
There you go. I like that. That's beautiful. I'm glad you found that too.
I know.
See, that's above and beyond. Above and beyond.
I know. I think it's pretty funny when I show up at anywhere with it, I'm kind of like, don't get it, let it be near any water. It's going to
No.
ruin it, It's not like today's suitcases, with the
Yeah.
waterproof exteriors.
Dust is fine.
Yeah, dust
'cause,
is fine.
Dust is fine. Water, no. Okay, I like that. Good. Jen, what are you working on going forward? It's Living the Next Chapter is the name of the show.
Yeah.
So I always like to find out from our authors, because the readers want to know as well. When we find an author we love, we're like, oh, please tell me. There's something down the road, maybe in the future. Anything you can
I
talk about?
feel like I'm living a lot of next chapters because the first novel that I referenced that never got published, I went back after this one was accepted by my publisher. I went back and looked at it again and worked on it a little more, and then I submitted it to my publisher as the title is Vacancy, and they accepted it, and it's going to get published next year. And it
Nice.
however, it's not a direct follow to Unspoken by any stretch. It's more the inspiration for Unspoken. And I already know from readers who have read Unspoken, they want to know what's going to happen next in Unspoken. Next, what's going to happen with Ruby? What about that man? What about the brother? Blah, blah, blah. They have all these questions, which I purposely made little references, but didn't answer them. And so that's those are the chapters I'm working on now, because I do have a sequel, and it's called Overdue. And maybe within the next couple months, I can submit it to my publisher for consideration also. So that'll make 3. And then I'll probably try to have a vacation somewhere. I don't know.
A book with the title Overdue is very appropriate for the library. If you have it too long, it'll be overdue. The book is overdue, and it's overdue.
This is the story of Ruby's brother, who has his own dreams and ideas, and is being forced to live up to his father's dreams and ideas. And in order to get away from his father, in order to pursue his own dreams, he has to get away from his father. But he always carries that guilt that he's overdue back home, and so that's kind of where that comes from. So
if there's an author, Jen, that's written a book, put it away, and went to a new project, you just said you brought it back, did some work on it, and now you're going to go forward with it. So we shouldn't throw stuff away, right? Write a book, write a story. Yeah, I'm not going to use this. Don't toss it. Keep it.
It's a great point, because another thing that always happens when you write a book, you're going to end up cutting out chapters or characters or key scenes or something that you thought were just brilliant, but they don't really work. And so those are other things you should save, because maybe one day you'll weave them into another story of their own, or maybe they'll become a short story, or maybe you'll just tease your newsletter mailing list and say, hey, would you like to read, the stuff that went to the cutting room floor? Well, here's one, so there's a lot of ways and reasons to use it all.
I like it.
Yeah.
Any plans for an audiobook of Unspoken?
There's going to be an audiobook of Unspoken. I don't know how long the time period is, but there's a narrator set to go on it. So
okay, great.
Yeah, and I was pretty specific. She needed a Texas twang, and so
nice. There you go.
Yeah.
Are you going to lend them the cardboard luggage, or
I should
they have to get their own?
I should send her a picture of it, because I have a feeling she wants to get into the mood of the story.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
And I have the other mission I really am on in life is to keep spinning these stories out, like leaving these little, I wouldn't call them cliffhangers, but leaving little clues at the end of every novel as to, for somebody to have questions about. And then I can work on my next novel, and I myself can answer those questions, because just like the reader, I may not know the answer either unless I write a whole nother story about it. So
Right.
Anyway, I have a whole series in mind that could go on for several more books, as long as.
So the good thing in all of this is that you can come back on the show and give us updates in the future.
I can come every year if you want me to, yes.
Let's just do that. We'll just put it in our calendar. You just keep writing, and I'll just keep having you back on the show.
Yeah, I would like it. It would really be fun. That would be great.
Excellent. Jann, tell us about your website too before we go, so we can go send everybody there. And then I have some instructions for the readers before we leave, but
All right.
tell us about your website.
Okay, my website is Jann Alexander.com. So Jann has two N's. JannAlexander.com. Pretty easy, right? And
Yep.
I have a blog where I write on creativity and historical research I've found in Texana, I call it, and just even photography, fun things. And that's JannAlexander.com/blog. So you can get on my mailing list there. You can find out about my future events, be they book talks or book clubs. I love doing book clubs. We do them by Zoom or we do them in person. So,
Okay.
So it's all there.
Good. All right. So if you host a book club and you're looking for a great guest to come on your Zoom book club, and I know Jann would love to meet people, talk about her story, and talk more about the book as well, and sell more books, right? That's kind of the idea, right?
Yes, exactly. But also just to be able to answer readers' burning questions, because they often want to know, why did you do that? Or what happened to him? And then I can say, well, that's for me to know and figure out for the next book.
Right, and if you see Jann at an event coming up, make sure you ask about the cardboard luggage. Maybe it'll be with her, and you can peruse inside there as well. I think that'd be really great.
That's true. I carry that cardboard luggage wherever I speak. Yeah.
All right, good. Every time it gets dusty, I'm going to think of you, Jann, which is great. My suggestion for the readers as well. I know Jann would love to hear your thoughts on Unspoken. When you leave your review, not if you buy a book, but when you're going to buy one for yourself and for someone else, I know you are, leave a great review. Jann would love to hear your thoughts. What you think of the characters, what you think of the story, something that's meaningful to you as a reader. Jann would love to hear your thoughts and your words and see what you have to say about the book. So please do that for Jann. I think she'd, again, be thrilled to see that. Jann, again, you got to come back.
I would love to come back.
You to it.
I would love to come back, yes. And this has been really entertaining, and I hope you don't see any dust real soon in Canada, but you enjoy the ski season, okay?
Okay, if it gets really dusty, I'll send some snow down to you, and we'll balance it all out.
Okay.
How's that?
That sounds great.
All right.
Thank you again,
Good.
Dave. It's been fun.
Thanks, Jann, so much.
Okay.
Excellent. Hey, thank you so much, again, for pressing play. As you've heard, great guests on the show. And one thing you didn't hear in this conversation is what? What did you not hear? Think about it for a second. That's right. Not a single solitary commercial for a mattress or a supplement or a whatever you call it. No. Why? Because we don't want to break up the conversation with commercials. So the fact that you're still here means that you are a fan of the show, I'm assuming. So if you want to help to keep the podcast going and to make me feel really happy, all I really care about is coffee, okay? I just got to be honest. I love coffee. I'm drinking one right now. It's starting to get cold. I need to warm it up. Helping us with our Buy Me a Coffee link over at livingthenextchapter.com and also in the show notes helps kind of keep the lights on around here. Remember, I'm doing this for free. I'm paying for everything. So I would love to have a little coffee donation, even $5. Kind of fills up my cup, and I would love to enjoy a coffee from you. So if you're interested, again, thank you for listening, but you can use our Buy Me a Coffee link and fill up the cup. Thanks for being here.